Okay, so welcome to the part 2 of the leadership series, and this is a multi-part series around the topic of leadership, how to develop leadership skills, and I'm sharing my experience and the frameworks that I've learned from some of the greatest leaders on the planet. So this is a multi-part series. If this is the first video that you're watching out of the series, you may not get the full value, so I recommend to watch the introduction, part 1, and this is part 2. So let's get right into it. Now we're going to be adding a couple of layers more on top of the leadership framework, and that these are perspectives to once again keep in your mind and also structure your communication based on these perspectives. Because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to put yourself in the person's shoes that is in front of you and trying to empathize with their situation and trying to understand why somebody would take the course of action that you are proposing to achieve a certain action. You don't own them, you don't control them, so why would somebody listen and move in that direction? So you will come up with a reason why they should do it. To understand that, you have to put yourself in their shoes and really think from their perspective. To give you an example, before every meeting that I had with a healthcare business owner who had millions of dollars in revenue, I would sit down and I would really put myself in that person's shoes. And I would ask myself the question, why would this person accept the deal that I'm proposing? Or what type of deal do I structure in which, he says yes? And how do I get him to sign the paper, etc.? So there was a process of leadership involved to get him from where he is to where we want to go, right? So to do that, he's going to take action from his standpoint. He's not going to take action from my standpoint. He doesn't care about my needs, my desires, or my goals, or my ambitions. I can talk about it a little bit, and I can give my background of why I am in the conversation, but ultimately the reason he would take action is not because of me. It would be because of him. And it was because the deal that I proposed or any course of action that I proposed ultimately benefited him. So we as people, we are listening from a very selfish point of view, and we are there is almost this mantra going on in our heads. What about me? What about me? What can I get? What about this problem I have? What about that problem I have? So first thing to understand is that people are listening to you from their own selfish interest. And it's very important for you to understand what that interest is. And a lot of the times you can understand it just by mentally putting yourself in their shoes. You can anticipate and you can guess what their interest is. And sometimes you may have to investigate a little bit. Oh, so why do you want to sell the company? Or why do you want this job? Or why XYZ? You have to go deep into what drives them in that particular situation towards that outcome. What is it that they want? Once you have that data, then you can actually structure your instructions or your directives or your communication based on constructing an outcome that would be desirable for them and having an incentive in that so it's desirable for you. You reach an agreement and you move forward, right? So first thing is their selfish interest. You have to account for their selfish interest. Second thing is that you have to structure your language. And this is going to be oversimplification, but it's one of the things that I have seen a lot of people do, is that you have to structure your language in a simple format, in a dumbed down format, so that everybody listening or somebody listening to you can understand exactly what you are saying. And avoid any technical jargon in leadership, especially when you're talking to the masses, or even if you're talking to a person, you don't know what the degree that they had, what kind of education background they had, what kind of cultural background they have. They may not be familiar with certain words that you might use So avoid complicated words, avoid technical words. And you would see, if you've watched a lot of my videos, you would see I speak in a very simple language. And I have seen a lot of people speak in a simple language. If you listen to someone like Carl Icahn or Steve Jobs, these guys have a very simple communication style. Even though they're talking about something very technical, layman can understand it. Warren Buffett is another one. He's a highly technical investor, but if you listen to him speak, he speaks in a very simple language that even a young person, even a kid would be able to understand him. So you have to tune your language to reach wider audiences. Avoid technicalities as much as possible. You would be surprised that even a lot of the bankers are not familiar with a lot of the financial terms. So you start using technical terms and it's going to create a problem. And actually, one of my business partners, he was a corporate finance expert, and he would meet these healthcare business owners and he would try to explain something to them. He would use words like retained earnings or EBITDA and, valuation and all of these technical terms. And the seller would get completely confused. And he would get frustrated because he's a 25, 30-year-old, 25, 30-year experienced, 60-year-old guy that has an expertise in corporate finance. And that's how he has talked, in technical terms. So he's used to that. He doesn't understand that he's even talking technical. So when the seller is like all confused, his eyes are confused, he is not able to understand. And then he would say, Prithvi, can you take the lead, please? Can you please explain what I mean? And then I would take what he said and make it very simple. And I would give very simple examples, and the seller would understand and would get excited and his eyes would light up. And the corporate finance guy would tell me, how did you do that? That was just amazing what you did. Even I was sold on what you were saying. It's because you made it so simple and clear. And I said to myself, this is what I do. When somebody's talking too technical, I look up definitions and I make it simple in my head. So that when I'm speaking to someone, I'm not using the same language, I'm being simple. This is not about impressing anybody. This is about leading. And you have to provide clarity and simplicity in your communication. And which brings me to the third point, is that people move from uncertainty to certainty. So you have to remove all the ambiguity out of the situation. Anything that's vague, anything that is not clear is going to create uncertainty. And you have to consider that you're speaking into someone else's listening, and they listen to you from their own point of views. And you have to make sure that you're not speaking for yourself, you're speaking for the other person. So to structure the language in a simple manner that it provides clarity, if you can provide clarity, you would be able to direct them very easily. So clarity is very important. There is a famous story in the book Release Your Brakes. It's one of highly recommended books by Dan Pena, Release Your Brakes. And in that book, there is a scene where a restaurant owner tells the staff to put sugar in a cup. And the sugar was the small sachets, the really small sachets of sugar that you see these days on restaurant. And the restaurant owner just wanted them to take this several packets of sugar and put it in a cup. And so he said, can you put the sugar in the cup? And the staff members started to open the sachet of the sugar and started to pour actual sugar in the cup. And then he started to laugh, and he was like, I should have been more specific and more clear of what I mean. So the fault was not of the staff, the fault was of the leader directing them, because he did not consider that these guys, haven't seen these small packets. And actually those days, it is from a time, that story is from a time where these sugar sachets were very new. So the staff members had not seen them. So it wasn't even in their reality something like that. So they were like, okay, instead of a large pouch, we have a small pouch. We're supposed to open it and then put it there. So that's an example of lack of clarity and lack of understanding. It's one of the most fundamental things that people get it wrong. So you have to simplify the conversation when you're speaking to someone, and you have to make sure they understand, and you have to make sure you're able to reach where they are listening from. And we listen from our own experiences that we have had. So if you speak in a simple manner, message will be conveyed very clearly. The other aspect, other layer of communication would be, and leadership would be, that people want to move from pain to pleasure. We are hardwired psychologically to move from pain to pleasure. So you could almost predict someone's behavior by this, that they will always move towards pleasure. Whether it's short-term or long-term pleasure, that's different, but they will always move towards pleasure. So a lot of the times when I was structuring deals with my board members, I was looking at what the seller wants. And one time, one of my board members gave me a feedback. Why do you keep talking about what the seller wants? What about us? And I said, let's talk about the seller first, because he's the guy who needs to sign the paper. Once we have addressed his needs, then we can bring our needs in the picture and see how to make it work and structure it in a manner that we are not taking the risk or we are not the ones losing. But we have to address his needs, otherwise he's not going to sign. And then the board member who had pointed out, he was like, you're right. So ultimately the person has to sign, and the person has to move towards pleasure for anything. It doesn't have to just be a deal. In any situation, you're moving towards the future and you're having an agreement on the future and the direction and the steps towards that future. You have to make sure the whole thing is leading ultimately to pleasure. There may be short-term pain, but they have to have experience. They have to experience pleasure. They have to see the pleasure in that future. And the bigger the pleasure, the more pain they will be willing to endure. So for example, the pleasure of having a six-pack abs and putting it on social media and their crush noticing them and getting attracted to them. So the pleasure would be a relationship with their crush, somebody they like, and being noticed by that person and being a consideration for that person as an attractive partner. That could be a very strong pleasure anchor to endure a serious amount of pain. And that's what we are driven by. And, sometimes a lot of the people take huge risks because there is a financial gain involved. There is a massive financial gain and the risk is small. So again, there is a short-term pain, but overall, there is a long-term pleasure, and, people take action. So you want to move them from uncertainty to certainty and from pain to pleasure. And it really has to be a slam dunk when it comes to pleasure. I mean, it has to be no-brainer that if I take these steps, I'm going to get X result and that's going to bring me this much of pleasure. And, this is what, it has to be completely clear. As Dan Pena often says, one of the quotes, that when value is clear, decisions are easy. When value is clear, decisions are easy. So if you are able to communicate that value from that person's standpoint, addressing their pain, moving them from pain to pleasure, they will look at you and the proposal very favorably, and they will move ahead. And you could almost look at it in a deal, whether somebody will accept it or not, before you even present it. And if you yourself feel uncomfortable with the structure, you have concerns in your mind, then most likely those concerns, and you have uncertainty whether this person will sign or not, you are uncertain yourself from that person's standpoint that this is not going to work for them. This structure is not going to work for them. And you have to adjust until you see clearly this person is going to say yes to this. And this is, again, something happened in while I was building my company. and I was negotiating with the owner of a $3.5 million company, and we had structured a deal with the board, and the deal was great for the owner, but it wasn't written in a clear format. The lawyer who had drafted it had left too many vague points, and that lawyer is no longer in the company, but he was there for some time, and he had structured this agreement, which is extremely complex and complex to understand. It had too many technical terms, and the seller did not even know what he was getting into. So I ran it through my other lawyer, my other business partner, who had advised on $13 billion bank mergers. And he said, this is too technical and complex for someone to read. You cannot have a legal agreement that is so vague and unclear, and it doesn't communicate the value. This agreement he's not going to sign. The lawyer, the big law firm lawyer, said no to the agreement, and the smaller law firm lawyer had structured this. And he said, my experience is that the seller signs when both the parties clearly understand the terms. You cannot leave any vagueness in the agreement. And time was short. I proposed the agreement. I knew this because I had done several leadership courses, and time was short. I was under pressure. I presented the offer, and he was like, Prithvi, I don't understand what this is. And I was like, okay, let me restructure it, and I'll send you an agreement which is in simple language. And then we went back, we reconstructed the agreement, simple language. Every point was clear, and every point clearly moved him from pain to pleasure, addressing his concerns, and structured in a manner that he benefits and we benefit. So both the parties benefit. It was a clean agreement with a cover letter. We presented it. It was a memorandum of understanding. Boom, he signed within 48 hours. So, couple of lessons to summarize. You have to be clear and simple in your communication. We are not there to impress anybody. You don't have to use technical terms when it's not needed. You want to move them from pain to pleasure, and you want to move them from uncertainty to certainty. So that's a deeper layer of perspective when you're communicating with someone. And more importantly, one final point is that you want to cater to their selfish interest, because they are in the conversation because they are getting something. So you have to outline the benefits that they would be getting. And it's not just the benefits that you think they want, but actually the benefits that they want from the transaction. What is it that they expect? And sometimes asking them the right questions can trigger that response, and you can get some additional data as to what is it that they're looking for, and you tie it, all of it in the deal. Put your interest as well, declare that to the person in front of you, and you can move them into action. I added a spin on the leadership series around deal making, but actually you could use this framework in any situation, because in any situation you would have these elements. You have person's selfish interest, you have the pain points that they have, you have the desires that they have, and you have communication, which is simple language, and you have pain and pleasure. And, so you have to move them towards pleasure. You have to sell them on the future that is going to be mutually beneficial. And once they agree on that, then you can discuss the action points as to how you could lead and summarize the action points. And then there you go. You would have an effective, well-rounded conversation, a basis for them to take action. And this basis is necessary. We don't just go into the situation and start directing or commanding people. We actually have to sell them and give them a whole perspective and provide a complete context, so that next time we speak, you don't have to sell them on anything. You just tell them, listen, we need to do this, because the context has been created. So this is important. Creating the basis for leadership, creating the context for leadership is absolutely important before they can be directed to action. So that's the second part, and I will talk to you soon.